In these video notes, we're going to talk about how to find and use our parallel lines, and we're going to see the same vocab words we saw in the previous notes, but then do some more things with them, such as with our measures of the angles and how they compare to each other. So first off, for our corresponding angles, that we need to have two parallel lines, and our symbol for parallel lines will be two little lines like this. So if we have two parallel lines that are cut by a transversal, remember our transversals are line T, so P and Q would be my two parallel lines. Then the pairs of the corresponding angles, so like 1 and 5, 2 and 6, 4 and 8, 3 and 7, are going to have the same measure. Remember, when I say same measure, that means that they're equal to each other. So if we have an angle at an angle that are corresponding angles, we can set them equal to each other to solve them. Next is our consecutive interior. Remember, consecutive means that they're on the same side of our transversal line, but interior means that it's between our two lines. So our intersecting lines here, they're parallel lines. So it's going to be something of these four. So our 5 and 4 and 3 and 6 would be our consecutive interior angles. And they are created by two parallel lines again, and they will be supplementary to each other. And if you look at it, 4 and 5, you can tell that 5 is an obtuse angle, 4 is an acute angle, so they definitely would not be the same measure. They're going to be supplementary. And here's your equation for our supplementary angles again. Consecutive exterior then is if we have our two parallel lines cut by the transversal. Then our consecutive exterior, so for example that would be 1 and 8 or 2 and 7, are also going to be supplementary. Our alternate interior angles are created by two parallel lines being cut by our transversal. Then the pairs of those alternate interior angles will have the same measure. So alternate interior would be like our angle 4 and 6, and then 3 and 5. So notice they're the same size for from each other. Lastly, our alternate exterior angles are, remember that those are going to be alternate sides, so on different sides of our transversal line, but they need to be exterior, so our groups on the outside. So that would be our 1 and 7 and 2 and 8. And if you look at it, 7 is obtuse, 1 is obtuse, so these are going to be the same measure. One big thing you have to remember is the only way that we can make these assumptions, or we can make those same conclusions, is if you have two sets of parallel lines. If we do not have parallel lines, then we cannot make that conclusion about the different angles. Example 1 says, look at the figure shown over here on the right. If you know that P and Q are parallel and you are given one angle measure, so let's say angle 1, is it possible to find all the other angle measures? The answer is yes, because if we know angle 1, we know that 5 is corresponding to it, and we know those are congruent to the same measure. If we have angle 1, angle 7 is alternate exterior with it, and those would be the same measure. If we had the angle 1, 1 and 3 are vertical angles, so really all 4 of those will be congruent to each other. So let's say we put in 100, this would also be 100 because they're vertical angles. The 5 would be 100 because it's corresponding, and 7 is alternate exterior with our angle 1. So all 4 of those would be 100. And then because we have a linear pair, angle 2, 4, 6, and 8 would also be similarly that they would be congruent as well, because 180 or with the angle 1 and angle 2 are linear pair, 2 and 4 are vertical angles, and then 2 and 6 are your corresponding, 2 and 8 then are your alternate exterior, and those are all congruent to each other. And just keep that in mind whenever we do a problem like this next one. So if I give you an example 2 that angle 3 is 82 degrees, we know that we can find all the rest because M and N are parallel to each other. So 2 would be parallel, or is vertical angles with it, so that's congruent. With angle 3, angle 7 is corresponding, so that would also be 82. Then 3 and 8, there's no correlation between 3 and 8, but or 3 and 6 is alternate interior, so that would also be 82. All right, so all 4 of those are 82, but then for the other remaining ones, we could do a variety of ways. If we look at our angle 3 and our angle 1, those are a linear pair, so that means that it would have 98 left over because they're supplementary. Angle 4 is a vertical angle with it, so I'm going to put that as 98 as well. 4 and 8 are corresponding to each other. They're in the same location, and those are congruent. Then when I get over to angle 5, maybe I want to use that 5 and 7 are supplementary, so that one's also going to be 98. If you want to jot down the reasons with each of those, or some of the reasons that it could have been, then go ahead, push pause, and then you can go ahead and do that. On example 3, I'm just going to go through and we're going to fill it all out. So angle 8 is 104. Then going along this same parallel lines, so if x and y are parallel to each other, I have 104 right there. I also have 104 with the 16 and 11. And then our angle 4, 7, 12, and 15 will be a 76 because they're supplementary. We're a linear pair with the ones right next to it. Okay, so then you have to think of, we also have another set of parallel lines. It doesn't tell us in the directions here, but we are going to, that was part what was forgotten on there. So these sets of lines are parallel. That means that angle 6 is 104 and so is angle 1, and then angle 2 and 5 are 76. If we work our same way around to the other side, then we know we have 10 and 13 is 76, and 9 and 14 is 104. Example 4, add in the directions to find angles x and y. So what you have to notice is these little marks right here that I have in pink, those mean that your lines are parallel. So we have two sets of problems that we need to look at, and they are separate from each other. So the y and the 120 are going to be our alternate or consecutive interior. And because they are supplementary, we know that we can add them together to equal 180 degrees. So when we solve for y, we know that y is going to be 60 degrees. X and 84 are also consecutive interior angles. They will also be supplementary. So on the angle x, I want you now to go through and find out what the angle x measure is going to be. Here's the work that you should have. You should have x plus 84 equals 180 degrees for the supplementary setup. And then when we solve for x, you get 96 degrees. On the back of your paper now, for example 5, we have to classify our pair of angles, so name the type of angles that they are. And then we are going to use those vocab words to figure out how to set up our equation. So first off, our two angles right here are x plus 15 and 90 are in the same location in the bottom right corner. So that would be corresponding. And we know that corresponding angles are congruent to each other, so we set up our angle equals the angle. When we do that, we get x plus 15 equals 90, and I want you now to solve for the x. When you subtract your 15 over, we should get x equals 75. And on these, we also need to find the measures of those angles given. So we already know this is 90 degrees. And if we take 75 plus 15, we also get 90 degrees for that measure as well, which proves that they are congruent to each other. All right, for the next problem, we have these two inside angles, and I want you to tell me what type of angles are they going to be, so to classify those angles. And those are alternate interior angles. They're on opposite sides of our transversal line, but they're between the two parallel lines, and they are congruent to each other. Here's the setup. Then we need to move the 5 to the left. Then we need to move the negative 34 to the right side, and then divide by 3, and we get x equals 12. But remember, we need to find the measures of each of those angles. So if we take those and put them back in, it should be the same for both. And we do both get, for both of those angles, we end up with 62 degrees. So it shows us that we did solve it correctly because they are both equal to each other. For this ocean question and our windsurfing person, we have some different setups. We have a y and we have an x that we need to solve for. So if we look at just the y's, the 2 and the 70 has the y in it, and that we need to figure out the name of those angles and then set those up. And angle 2 and our 70 degrees are corresponding angles, which means they are congruent to each other. So we could set up them equal to each other. When we do that, when we solve them, we end up with y equals 25. Now if we do the same thing for the ones in green, so our angle 1 and our 70 degrees, sometimes it helps to redraw the lines, just the lines that you need, and those are on the same side and they're on the inside or between our two lines. This would be our consecutive interior. And those would be supplementary to each other. Our equation then should be 2x plus 10 plus 70 equals 180 degrees. So when we solve for x, you should end up with x equals 50. This last question is a challenge question, but it is a pretty common question that they like to put on the benchmark. So that'll be later in the year, but still applicable. So we need to find the value of x. And a hint is you might need to extend some of our segments to connect some different things. Plus we need to know that the sum of the interior angles in a triangle, so if you have a triangle that's created, the interior angles, all three of them will add up to equal 180 degrees. Okay, so if we extend this line out right here, now we have a triangle. I know that if here is my two lines, so if my Washington Street, Lincoln Street, and here's my angle, my line going through it, if this is 51 degrees, this one on the other side will also be 51 degrees because those are alternate interior angles. Then we do have a triangle here. And with the triangle, we know that if we add up all three angles, it will equal 180 degrees. So if we do that and solve for our question mark, we end up with 92 degrees here in our triangle. So I'm going to put that up above. So this is 92 degrees. Now, if these two angles right next to each other are a linear pair, I know then that 92 plus x has to equal 180 degrees. So my x value, when I solve that, would equal x equals 88. And there is our final answer for the x there in the middle.